Hello, everyone, and welcome as you are just coming in, joining our really fascinating program. I can't wait to hear today on ensuring our water future. We are going to get started in just a little bit. I know we will continue to have folks joining from our Zoom waiting room, but because we have a lot of content in a short time and some amazing speakers, we are going to get started. So my name is Tara Jackson. I have the privilege of serving as president and CEO of Arizona Town Hall, a nonprofit organization that's been around for almost 65 years and one that really values collaboration and working with all of our partners, not only in Arizona, but far beyond, including our neighbor to the south, Mexico. So I am also here as part of a collaboration we have with the Maricopa Community College District and serving there as their Chief Dialogue Officer. All about educating, engaging, and really helping to create solutions to whatever the greatest challenges are that face not only our state, but our region, our nation, and far beyond. We're here as part of a program with the International Relations Committee. This group and committee has a series of programs on content like the one that you have today. They also meet in person and even conduct training on the town hall process for delegates from countries all over the world. It is spearheaded by the wonderful Linda Elliott-Nelson, who I will turn this over to in just a second. But I also, before I turn it over to Linda, I want to give a special shout out to our financial sponsor for these programs, the Nelson Family Charitable Fund. And if you enjoy this program today, please feel free to continue to support our efforts by supporting Arizona Town Hall or your favorite nonprofit organization. And with that, I will turn it over to Linda to begin our program. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Tara. We have been doing these forums with Mexico for the past 9 years and cover a bunch of topics, but obviously the water one is very, very important to us and to our neighbor. We have a great moderator today, and I will introduce him. His name is Paul Brierley. He is the director of the Arizona Department of Agriculture. He was raised working on his family's diversified farm. After earning an electrical engineering degree and spending 5 years in telecommunications research, he returned to production agriculture in southeast Arizona. Paul worked with producers across Arizona as Farm Bureau's Director of Organization for 10 years. Then in 2014, he became the founding executive director of the University of Arizona's Yuma Center of Excellence for Desert Agriculture, which he built into a highly effective agricultural research organization. He is highly respected and represents the best of our agriculture industry in Arizona. On June 26, 2023, Paul took over the reins as director of the Arizona Department of Agriculture under the appointment of Governor Katie Hobbs. He continues his tradition of partnering with industry to work towards the best possible outcomes in carrying out the agency's mission to protect the health and safety of Arizona consumers, advance and support Arizona agriculture, and safeguard commerce. Paul, thank you very much for moderating this forum.
Linda, thank you so much. Thanks for your role. And good morning, everyone. We have over 100 people registered, so we know it's a hot topic, and we appreciate you joining us today. Arizona Town Hall has a 64-year history of bringing together Arizona citizens and policymakers to build consensus on critical policy issues. And through this cross-border connecting series, it brings Mexico into the conversation. And Mexico obviously is a critical partner on many issues that we face. None of those issues are as important, in my opinion, as water. For us in agriculture, we're the largest water user in both countries. Along our border, agriculture simply couldn't exist without water. And of course, without agriculture, nobody eats. But there's many other users of water, and we all need to coexist. We need to coexist to ensure our sustainability and our economic vitality, and that's a shared mission. We all depend on each other, and that's the title of today's forum, Ensuring Our Water Future. So as I said, a lot of interest, and the timing is amazing, as Arizona Town Hall is wont to do. They schedule something, and it ends up being a very timely topic. So Arizona and Governor Hobbs have been actively working towards a solution to the Colorado river water shortage, and we're awaiting federal action any day on the Colorado River operating agreement. So while we hope for an agreement between the 7 states and Mexico, we are waiting to see what the federal government has to say. So I want to get right into the discussion. We've got 2 great panelists, one from Arizona and one from Mexico. Dr. Rhett Larson is the Richard Morrison Professor of Water Law at Arizona State University's Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. He's also a Senior Research Fellow with the Kyle Water Center, and he specializes in domestic and international water law and policy. And our second panelist from Mexico is Dr. Eliana Rodriguez, a professor of civil engineering. She leads the Water Resources and GIS Systems Laboratory and is the Deputy Director of the Engineering Institute at UABC in Mexicali. I was born in Calexico, by the way, next door. She specializes in groundwater and surface water interactions. So I think we're going to be really short on time today, so I'm going to turn it right over to Rhett Larson. He's going to give us a general background on the U.S.-Mexico water agreements up to and around 2007, and then Dr. Rodriguez will take it from there. So Rhett, go ahead.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul. Thank you to Arizona Town Hall and to all the efforts to plan. It's great to be here with both Paul and Eliana, who are friends of mine. So it's nice to be among friends. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I'm from the border region. I grew up in Yuma, Arizona. I come from a farming and a ranching family. I'm a 7th generation Arizonan. My grandmother is from Chihuahua, Mexico. Her father, my great-grandfather, accidentally sold cars to Pancho Villa during the Mexican Revolution. He didn't know that's who he was selling cars to. When the Federales found out that he had sold cars to Pancho Villa's men, the Federales moved against him. So he and his family, my grandmother, crossed the Rio Grande. She was carrying my uncle in her arms. She crossed the Rio Grande. They came ultimately settled here in central Arizona. So it's an important issue, one that I grew up with. I grew up just steps from where the Colorado River crosses from Arizona and into Sonora. I'm going to share some slides and hopefully keep this as brief as possible so that people have the opportunity to hear from Eliana and ask questions. Very quickly, here we go. I want to make sure it's clear I do sit on the board of directors of the Arizona-Mexico Commission, where part of my responsibilities are working on water issues, but everything I'm about to say here, I'm saying solely in my capacity as Rhett Larson. I'm not speaking on behalf of any of the entities that I work with, including the Arizona-Mexico Commission or the Arizona Water Infrastructure Finance Authority. I'm also general counsel to the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association. I'm not speaking for any of them. This is just on my own behalf. Just to give you a broad overview of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to focus on mainly the 3 largest river basins that we share with Mexico. The Colorado, which will be the principal focus given that we're here in Arizona, the Rio Grande, and the Tijuana River. When I talk about the Colorado, I'm going to bring in another important tributary to the Colorado River that is a transboundary river, the San Pedro. But I also want to make sure we're at least touching on other critical water that we share between Arizona and Mexico, and that is effluent, wastewater, stormwater, and groundwater, which are sometimes forgotten because we focus so much on these big river systems. So let's talk, first of all, some background on the Colorado River and how we share the Colorado River between the United States and Mexico. Early on, we had something called the Harmon Doctrine. This was named after the Attorney General during the Taft administration, Judson Harmon, who basically said countries have absolute territorial sovereignty over their water. They don't owe any of their neighbors any water flowing to them. Now, in 1922, we enacted the Colorado River Compact. What was happening in the compact is California was growing very fast, and Western water law in the United States recognized something called prior appropriation, meaning the first people who got to a river and put it to beneficial use had superior claim to anybody who came after them. It was a first in time, first and right regime. Well, other states in the Colorado River Basin got very concerned that California was growing so fast that they would gobble up the whole river. So they agreed to the 1922 Colorado River Compact. Now, what the compact does is something relatively simple. It splits the river in half between 2 sub-basins of the Colorado. It gives 7.5 million acre feet of water to the upper basin and 7.5 million acre feet of water to the lower basin. The upper basin, everything that's upstream of Lee's Ferry in Arizona. The lower basin, everything downstream. The lower basin's Nevada, Arizona, and California. The upper basin, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Wyoming. Now, I am going to say acre feet a lot during this presentation. An acre foot is about 326,000 gallons of water. It's about 1,233 cubic meters. It's about the amount of water that 2 households in Arizona use in a year. It is 1 acre flooded to 1 foot deep. Why do we measure water in acre feet? Because in the United States of America, if there's a ridiculous way to measure things, we will pick whatever is the weirdest way to measure something. So split the river in half. Now, the 1922 compact did contemplate that someday there would be a treaty with Mexico. Now, what the compact said is when the treaty with Mexico is ultimately enacted, Mexico will receive whatever is surplus above those waters that are allocated to the states. And if there is no surplus, then the 2 basins will share equally in reducing their water in order to meet the Mexican obligation under a treaty that's ultimately enacted. Now, this 1922 compact was very controversial. Arizona didn't join early on. We didn't sign the compact until 1944. Part of the reason we didn't sign it is we just didn't trust California. It created a lot of tension between the states at the time. California moved forward with what's the 1928 Boulder Canyon Project Act, which authorized the construction of Parker Dam. Now, Arizona had crews inside, spies inside the construction crew of Parker Dam. And when the construction crews crossed the Colorado River into Arizona, those spies warned the governor of Arizona at the time, Benjamin Baker Moores, that California had crossed into Arizona's territory. Arizona had been secretly building the Navy of Arizona to sail up the Colorado River, destroy Parker Dam, and chase out the invading Californians. There's actually correspondence at the time in Germany amongst generals who said the United States won't enter World War II because they're about to descend into a water-based civil war. Now, fortunately, everybody's calmed down a lot since then, and all the states get along with each other really well. No, we're maybe angrier at each other right now than we have been in our entire history. Now, 1944 rolls around, and we agree to the Rivers Treaty between the United States and Mexico. That treaty is a complex treaty that governs hydrodiplomatic relationships all along the border, including the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, including the Colorado, including the Rio Tijuana. It took an entity that existed at the time that was only about border limits and turned it into an entity that also deals with transboundary waters. On the United States side, it's called the IBWC, the International Boundaries and Waters Commission. On the Mexican side, it's called SILA, the Comisión Internacional de Límites y Agua. Each entity has an appointed commissioner that interacts with each other. And Eliana will give you a lot more detail about some of the more recent ways in which IBWC SILA has worked together on a lot of projects. In Arizona v. California, we have one of our pieces of Supreme Court litigation between the states. Basically, what this did was recognize rights in the Colorado River for certain Arizona tribes, certain tribes across the Colorado River Basin, and excluded from Arizona's allocation of the Colorado River all of its tributaries. Then in 1968, we get the Colorado River Basin Project Act. This act was a very careful sort of trade-off that Arizona made. Arizona said, well, what good does it do us to have all of these rights to the Colorado River if we can't bring them into central Arizona where our population is? We need to build a big canal. Well, to build a big canal, we needed California's congressional delegation on board. And to get their delegation on board, we had to trade something. California said, we will support the construction of this canal, the Central Arizona Project, if, Arizona, you agree that that Central Arizona Project is junior in the lower basin, that when there are cuts, the cuts come first from the Central Arizona Project. Arizona made that trade and is now facing the risks of it. We agreed, if you support the Central Arizona Project, we'll be junior. And that's why in these times of shortage, so much of the fear is happening to people who rely on the Central Arizona Project. Now, I don't want to get into all of this. It's way too many words that you want to read. But one of the points I want to make about the Colorado River Basin Project Act from 1968 is that it says that the obligation that's owed to Mexico under the Rivers Treaty, which is 1.5 million acre feet every year from the Colorado River, that obligation is a national obligation, not a regional or state obligation. So one of Arizona's arguments that we're making right now as we're facing potential cuts is you can't cut Arizona solely to meet the obligation to Mexico. It's a national obligation, not an obligation that can only be put on the Central Arizona Project. So you need to spread those cuts across the nation and not just on Arizona. Another important thing to note from the Colorado River Basin Project Act is our junior priority in the lower basin is not a junior priority to the upper basin. Additionally, that junior priority in the lower basin of the Central Arizona Project, we can get out of that junior priority if we augment our water supply to the point that the lower basin is meeting its obligation to Mexico solely through augmented water, meaning things like desalination or imported water. So when we talk about should we invest in desalination, it's not just the value of the increased water supply, though that's really important, or the diversified water supply, that's important, but it's also the potential that Arizona, by investing in desalination, could buy the Central Arizona Project out of its junior priority in the lower basin. Now, the way this works is 7.5 million acre feet to the upper basin, 7.5 million acre feet to the lower basin, 1.5 million acre feet to Mexico. We lose about 1.5 million acre feet every year to evapotranspiration. Add it all together, the entire river basin assumes 18 million acre feet in the river every year. We know from tree ring analysis that the average 1,000 year amount of water in the river is about 13.5 million acre feet. Now, how did we get it so wrong? It's because in 1922, when we enacted the Colorado River Compact, we based the data on flood years. So whoops-a-daisies. Add on top of that bad math, an aridifying climate that we're getting hotter and drier air and soil, which means less and less of our snowpack is making it to the river, and we're just going to have to live with a different river going forward. Now, I want to talk briefly about the San Pedro River. It's a river that's really important to Arizona. It's really important to the communities in Cochise County. It begins in the highlands in Sonora, in and around Cananea. Cananea is a copper mining region, and so a lot of the water that's used in Cananea gets put towards copper mining. It also means that it deals with a lot of acid mine drainage and other contamination from copper mining operations that ultimately do cross the border in the San Pedro. It also crosses the border and reaches Sprinka, which is the San Pedro Riparian Natural Conservation Area, which is managed by the Bureau of Land Management. It's one of Arizona's last sort of free-flowing wild rivers. It supports a really diverse habitat. It's important for tourism in the area. That river also supports the town of Sierra Vista, which is a really fast-growing community, and supports Fort Huachuca, a military base. Now, in U.S. water law, all federal reservations of land, including Native American reservations, military bases, and riparian preserves like Sprinka, all have water rights. And so this creates a really tense water right debate and litigation between towns like Sierra Vista, military bases like Fort Huachuca, and federal government management and sort of natural resource areas like Sprinka. This is all being run through Arizona's general stream adjudications, which are decades long in litigating these water rights with no end in sight. There are also real challenges with border enforcement in the region. As you look at more militarization of the border, we're investing more in bringing more military troops to the border. There are conversations about taking the Roosevelt line, which is that 60-foot sort of buffer around the border, and making it part of military bases like Fort Huachuca in order to secure more resources. But if we do that, there are water rights implications for calling the border a military base, because military bases have water rights. And so it puts more strain on some of these debates over who owns and controls the water if we militarize the border. It also attracts a lot more people to the region, which means we get more groundwater overdraft, more people pumping, which takes us to the groundwater issue. The groundwater issue can be really challenging, particularly in the Douglas area. Douglas is a border community that shares a border with Agua Prieta. Douglas is now an active management area, which means it's regulating more stringently its groundwater supply, but it does not have the Central Arizona Project or Colorado River water in the same way that other active management areas in Central Arizona do. So it's going to be complicated looking for ways that it can reduce its groundwater pumping. And some of that might come from a more cooperative relationship between Douglas and Agua Prieta about addressing non-revenue water leaks, or upgrading our water infrastructure, our wastewater infrastructure, to create more groundwater recharge opportunities. And I think that's going to be the future of that sort of active management region, is a closer relationship between Douglas and Agua Prieta. It also raises issues, particularly on stormwater and effluent in ambos Nogales. So we have Nogales, Sonora, and Nogales, Arizona. There's a lot of stormwater that will sometimes flow across the border from Nogales, Sonora into Arizona. That stormwater causes a lot of damage to infrastructure. It floods ports of entry, which disrupts commerce. It also causes a lot of contamination that overwhelms the infrastructure that exists there, the International Outfall Interceptor, and causes a lot of challenges in the region. So more investment in stormwater management and wastewater management, particularly in Ambos Nogales, is going to be important going forward. And I just want to make sure we're touching quickly and briefly on the Rio Grande because it is important even in Arizona. Under that standard, we have a complex relationship with Mexico because we're both upstream and downstream. We're upstream on the Colorado, but we're downstream on the Rio Conchos. And so Mexico has an obligation to deliver 1.75 million acre feet of water on the Rio Conchos over a 5-year period. Climate change impacts have created a lot of challenges. In Chihuahua, in and around some of the dams there have been real conflicts when Mexico has released dams from reservoirs to meet its treaty obligations, and that water hasn't gone to farmers in Chihuahua. There's been objections from farmers, particularly sugar farmers in Texas or rice farmers in Texas, about deliveries of water. This has created a lot of conflict and tension. It came up in the Bayview Irrigation District NAFTA controversy as irrigations and districts in Texas sued Mexico under NAFTA. It looks like we're moving forward with improved relationships, but sometimes we say, well, hey, we need to more closely integrate our debates over the Colorado River with the debates in the Rio Grande. I tend to caution against that. Each river is its own complex entity with its own complex politics. We should be careful about blending those challenges. And then the Tijuana River, which is somewhat less about water scarcity and more about water quality. The growth of maquiladoras, the growth of international investment in manufacturing and business growth in Tijuana has overwhelmed a lot of Tijuana's infrastructure. So we get a lot more wastewater contamination that's not just municipal wastewater, but increasingly industrial wastewater that's reaching the beaches. It causes a lot of beach closures in and around both northern Baja as well as into San Diego. And it causes a lot of tension. So more investment in resources in this region, but it might mean that a lot more of the resources that we talk about when it comes to desalination might be moving closer to the Tijuana region as we're talking about investing in wastewater issues there. And then that brings up sort of salt issues. So in 1974, Mexico complained that the water that was crossing the Colorado River was too salty. In response, the United States built the desalting plant in Yuma to desalinate the Colorado River. That desalting plant has been just too expensive. We almost never turn it on. Instead, we use interceptor ditches to divert salty runoff away from the Colorado River and to a wetland called the Ciénaga de la Santa Clara wetland. Now, that wetland sort of depends now on a lot of that agricultural diversion, but it's a lot of water that we could use. So there are a lot of people talking about, should we sort of reconfigure the Yuma desalting plant to put that salty agricultural runoff water back to use? If we do that, how much is it going to cost to get our hands on that supply? And what's the impact on that wetland in Mexico? There's also been challenges around more lining of canals in southern Arizona and southern California, because as we line canals to get more efficient, it means less and less water percolating into the ground and moving into Sonora to support Sonoran shallow aquifers and farming in Sonora. So it's another way to see the relationship between surface water and groundwater, something that Eliana is an expert on, and I am hopefully going to get out of her way and let her talk now. Thanks.
Rhett, thank you. I feel like I know a lot about water, but whenever I listen to you, I learn something new every time. And speaking of that, with questions I didn't mention at the beginning, but please, if there's any questions that you want us to try to address, if we have time at the end, put them in the Q&A box rather than in the chat, and we will do our best to get to them. Great timing, and I think we'll roll on to Eliana and have her pick up from where Rhett left off and talk about U.S.-Mexico water agreements over the years and where we're at in the current situation. Then we'll get to questions and discussion if we have time after that. So go ahead.
Thank you. And also thank you for the invitation. And I'm so glad to be here. And Rhett, thank you for all the introductions and to all these water issues that we have in our shared water. Well, good morning, everyone. Today, I would like to provide a brief overview of what has happened since 2007 in the cooperation between the U.S. and Mexico related to the Colorado River and a little bit of Tijuana and Bravo, but mostly in the Colorado River. Rather than looking only the individual agreements, I want to show you how the relationship has evolved over time. Since 2007, we have moved toward a much more flexible form of binational water management, one that now includes also shortage sharing, conservation, water storage, environmental restoration, and also science and monitoring. Since 2007, binational cooperation has evolved from sharing water under fixed rules that Rhett told us very well, to sharing responsibility for managing scarcity. This evolution is especially important today because the Colorado River is facing unprecedented pressure. We all know that. To understand this relationship, you saw this map in Rhett's presentation. We first need to remember the scale of the Colorado River system. The river supports approximately 40 million people and around 2 million hectares of irrigated agriculture. The most use of this water is agriculture in both countries, in the US and Mexico, and also in Arizona and Baja California. Arizona is one of the major uses, and also in Mexico downstream, the country receives its treaty allocations at the end of the basin, at the end of the system. So decisions that are made anywhere in the basin are interconnected. What happens in Lake Powell, Lake Mead, or Arizona or California, even in the upper basin, also has consequence for Mexico and for his Colorado River Delta. But, But the main message of this presentation is to represent by this figure. I want to give you this presentation to know that historically cooperation was primarily about volume, as Rhett told us, and how much water each country was entitled to receive, even in the Bravo or in the Colorado or Tijuana. Over time, this relationship became more complex, very, very more complex. We get other issues about water quality and salinity where at, followed by infrastructure, environmental concerns, restoration, drought, and finally, cooperative management of scarcity. In other words, the institutional framework has evolved from simply allocation water toward actively managing and share an increasingly scarce resources. This institutional adaptation has been one of the most important achievements of binational cooperation. This timeline provides the historical context that Rhett has told us in the 1944 Water Treaty that established the fundamental legal allocations and also the subsequent minutes addressing infrastructure, deliveries, salinity, and begin around 2000. Environmental issues. But there's an important change after 2007. From that point forward, the agreements increasingly deal with flexibility, conservation, shortage, storage, also Mexico storage water in the US, restoration, and also system resilience. So for today's discussion, 2007 represents a useful turning point between the traditional water allocations that we used to have and adapting binational management. I think it doesn't work in the proper time. Well, and in this timeline, we summarize what happened in since 2007. In 2007, the United States adopted the interim shortage guidelines for the lower basin. This was important for Arizona because it established rules for shortage conditions in Lake Mead. Also, then in 2010, minus 317 and 318 demonstrated something very important. The treaty framework could be flexible following the Mexicali earthquake that we have in 2010. Mexico was allowed to adjust deliveries and temporarily store water in Lake Mead, which also helps to raise the elevations in that lake. In 2012, Minute 219 went much further. It's introducing mechanisms for Mexico to store water in Lake Mead, participate in shortage and surplus conditions, invest in conservation projects, and also one of the key parts that has been provided this minute is that the environmental flows for the Delta. Minute 323, signed in 2017. I'm sorry, something happens with my presentation. Yeah. Expand these mechanisms and establish long-term framework for binational cooperations. From 2019 onward, drought contingency planning became increasingly important, as you see in this timeline, and also for managing deliveries to jointly manage risk. But now the 7 basin states were unable to reach consensus on post-2026 that, as we see in this timeline, that is on the Colorado River operations. And in July 2026, this past month, the Bureau of Reclamation released the final environmental impact statement establishing a flexible operations path from the federal government. Negotiations continue, but short-term operation plans potentially include substantial lower basin reductions and are increasingly likely to guide the transitions beginning in 2027. I think that the major development in 2026 is that the process has shifted from waiting for a 7-state agreement to establish a federal framework that can operate even without a full consensus of the states. And for Mexico, we're still waiting for this consensus and to also begin with the conversation. Well, why is this cooperation become necessary? This graph shows the answer very clearly. Lake Mead has been, let me put my laser here. This is the Lake Mead elevation in feet, and also this for the years. And we have here the minutes that have been more increasingly active in the Mexico side. Well, Mead has experienced a major decline in elevation. This is our measurement, like the administrative drought, and the system is no longer operating under the hydrological conditions that exist when many of the regional allocations were established. Even when the treaty was established, the Colorado River was over-allocated. So Arizona and Mexico have had to participate in reductions, contingency measurements, conservation programs, and also additional actions that intend to protect storage in Lake Mead. The key point is that shortage is no longer a hypothetical future scenario. It has become part of the actual river operations. So cooperation has therefore shifted from preparing for scarcity to actively managing the scarcity. Behind the reservoir decline is a much broader climatic change. Long-term observation also projections of the Colorado River basin shows that increased temperatures and are creating additional pressure on water availability. This means that the problem cannot be understood only as a subsequence of individual dry years. We are dealing also with changing hydrological conditions that require long-term adaptations. These historical records that this is temperature and this is precipitation. This is a very good study. If you have time, please, if you not read it before, but you can read it. It's full in the internet and help illustrate that change. Precipitation remains highly variable, but the temperature signal is much clearer across both of the upper and the lower Colorado River basin. The temperatures have increased over the historical record. This is more than 100 years of records. And that matters because higher temperatures increase evapotranspiration and reduce the amount of water that ultimately becomes runoff. So even when precipitation is not extremely low, a warmer basin can produce less water. This is one of the reasons why future agreements will need to be more flexible than the agreements on the past. Another important part of the discussion is understanding how water is consumed through the basin. Water use is not limited to cities. Agriculture represents a very high component of consumptive use. Also, reservoir evaporation, evapotranspiration from riparian systems. For Mexico, agriculture represents an especially important share of water use. We use mostly 80 to 90% of the water allocations in agriculture. This is why future conservation cannot focus only on a sector or on a jurisdiction. The challenges are basin-wide, and solutions will increasingly require cooperation among also agricultural users, cities, governments, environmental organizations, and water agencies that we must work together. Infrastructure is another essential part of the history. Dams and channels transformed the Colorado River, as we all know, in one of the most highly managed river systems in the world. These projects create enormous social and economic benefits, but also dramatically reduce the amount of water reaching the delta. And you can see here, this the Colorado River Delta in Mexicali. It's and all this is agricultural lands. And by the end of the 20th century, the challenge was before no longer simply to how to deliver water to users. It was also whether some water could be managed to sustain ecological functions in the delta. And that question opened a new chapter in binational cooperation. The environmental dimension did not begin in 2007. An important foundation was MINO 306 in 2000, which established a national framework to study the riparian and estuarine ecological of the Colorado River and its delta. What is significant is that the environmental questions become formally incorporated into the 3D process into the minutes. This created the scientific and institutional foundation that later made the environmental components of MINO 319 and 323 possible. MINO 306 especially established studies on the effects of flows on riparian and estuarine ecology and the habitat needs. So MINO 319, and signed in 2012, was a major turning point. For the first time, water was explicitly designed for environmental purposes in the Colorado River Delta. The agreement also includes both post-flow and base flows components, with contributions from Mexico, the United States, and non-governmental organizations, which is the first time that this third party of the governments have been included in these minutes. The most visible event was in 2014, is the post-flow, which were delivered almost 130 million cubic meters that were released from the Morelos Dam, which is the last dam in the Colorado River system. And this was in May 2014 and released to the Delta. But perhaps even more important than the volume itself was the institutional innovation. Governments, scientists, water managers, NGOs were now working together to deliver water and monitor its effects and learn from the results. This introduced the adaptive management into the binational Colorado River cooperation in the environmental component. And one of the less visible, but perhaps most important outcomes of these agreements has been the creation of permanent working relationships. Since 2012, binational work groups have brought together agencies, university, NGOs, scientists, states, personals, and also team monitoring teams and especially disciplinary groups. This is important because cooperation is not only the agreement that is signed, it is also the network of people who meet regularly, share data, design monitoring programs, evaluate the results, and adjust for future conditions. In many ways, these professionals' relationships are what make adaptive management possible in the Colorado River. In 2017, MINO 323 was signed, and it was built on the experience of MINO 319 and expanded to environmental commitment. The agreement established approximately 259 million cubic meters for environmental purposes in Mexico over a 9-year period, also working together the US, Mexico, and the NGOs. And it also includes some funding for scientific research and monitoring, as well as restoration projects. An important characteristic of this model is shared responsibility. I think it's a very good example of what we can do if we work together. Governments and non-governmental organizations contribute to water, funding, knowledge, and implementation capacity. So MINO 323 moved the environmental program from an experience toward a sustained binational restoration strategy. Science has been fundamental to this process. During MINO 319, monitoring focuses on understanding the response of the 2014 pulse flow and subsequent water deliveries. Under Minute 323, this evolved in a long-term monitoring program that integrates surface water, groundwater, vegetation, birds, and evapotranspiration. From the hydrological perspective, we analyze how different delivery strategies affect the river flows, groundwater levels, soil conditions, and also the availability of water for the restored vegetation areas. The important concept here is adaptive management, and also we monitor, analyze, and work, and what we did not work, and use those lessons to improve future water deliveries and restoration strategies. This is what cooperation looks like on the ground. These photographs show hydrological field monitoring in the Delta. We are huge teams from NGOs, universities that work together to see the results of this implementation of the environmental flows. And these groundwater measurements, surface water observation, water quality work, and flow measurements. So this data allow us to understand not only how much water is delivered, but where the water goes, how long it remains in the system, and how groundwater and surface water can interact. This scientific information is essential for making future environmental deliveries more efficient in this scarcity scenario that we have right now. So one tangible results of this cooperation is the restoration for more than 500 hectares of riparian habitat in the Colorado River Delta. And also that sometimes we have a flowing river, which before we study a dry river, now we can have the opportunity to study in some events a flowing river in the Mexico side. These sites demonstrate that relatively small and strategically managed volumes of water can generate important ecological benefits when water deliveries are coordinated with restoration scientific monitoring. These landscapes also are evidence that binational agreements are no longer limited to water accounting, and they're producing measurable changes on the ground. So after almost 2 decades of experience since 2007, what we have learned, I will summarize the evolution of the U.S.-Mexico cooperation around the Colorado River in 3 main lessons, which are: the first is the strong institutions matter. The 1944 treaty provides the legal foundation, but its value has also been its ability to accommodate new agreements as conditions have changed. A lot of conditions, not only hydrological. Second, successful cooperation now requires much more than allocating water. It requires flexibility, monitoring infrastructure, technical information, science, and perhaps most important, political and institutional trust. And third, cooperation is becoming more complex. We are no longer managing only a river allocation between 2 countries. We are connecting federal governments, states such as Arizona, Mexican institutions, agricultural users, cities, scientists, NGOs, and environmental interested. The challenge after 2026 will therefore be not simply to provide or to divide a small amount of water that we have, but to develop more mechanisms that allow the entire system to adapt to greater scarcity. The experience since 2007 shows that cooperation is possible, but future cooperation will need to be even more innovative. So to conclude, the most important change in 2007 is that Arizona, Mexico, and the broader Colorado River community have increasingly moved from sharing water under these fixed rules to sharing their responsibility and also for managing scarcity. They may be one of the most important foundations for the Colorado River, and I think the other rivers are on their way to be like in this, like in the phase that we are in the Colorado River Delta. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you both. Yeah, Rhett, come back on. Great information, and you guys are right on time. So congratulations, professional speakers. We have one question in the Q&A. I just want to remind everybody else, if you want to put questions in there, we will try to get to them. I'm going to ask one to get us started. Rhett, I've heard you say before that we're not running out of water, we're running out of cheap water. And that makes me want to ask, when you think about the role of technology, the possibilities for augmentation, if you guys could both maybe talk a little bit about what you see, especially if money were no object, but accounting for money too, what opportunities are there to augment or find more water to help us out?
Well, on the desalination side, which is what people usually jump to people's mind when they think of water augmentation, people are often very quick to dismiss desalination as an option because they have this idea that it's just so expensive. And that was true for a long time. So the states that were doing most of the desalination in the 1980s were very energy rich, very water poor states like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And back then, the best systems could produce a single cubic meter of fresh water from salt water using about 35 kilowatts of power. Now, the best systems in the world can do it at about 2.5 kilowatts. So the technology's come a long way. It's much more energy efficient. But to get those efficiencies, you need to co-locate the desalination plant with wastewater disposal. You need to co-locate it with power generation to cut down on your transmission losses. You usually need to integrate it with photovoltaic solar cells. You need to integrate it with pressure transfer systems that allow you to recycle pressure from the waste stream into the production stream. And so even though the technology's come a long way, it's still more expensive than, digging another ditch or drilling another well. So, but since it's come a long way and because costs are beginning to go down, you're seeing more places move into it. And Mexico has started to move in that direction, mainly in a lot of sort of resort areas. You've seen Mexico doing more investment in desalination. And as long as Mexico is looking in those sort of resort areas at expanding desalination capacity, it seems silly for Arizona and the United States to not at least have a conversation about how we can partner with Mexico on what we can do to improve co-location of some facilities, improve wastewater infrastructure, and integrate them with that desalination capacity. Obviously, I don't know that building a big desalination plant in the Sea of Cortez and piping a bunch of expensive water all the way into Phoenix makes a lot of sense. That's just too much money. But as a reasonably sized co-located plant, perhaps in Tijuana, where there is more money going in that direction for water treatment, but maybe in the Sea of Cortez that augments the supply in Sonora and Baja, and then allows us to, through an exchange agreement, take some water that would otherwise go to Mexico. I think those are important conversations that we should be having with Mexican counterparts.
Great. Now, Eliana, I know you're an engineer. Are there other things out there besides desalination?
Yeah, I think also water treatment, it's as Rhett says, that we need to include a lot of variables in the system, not just desalination, but I think water treatment is a very, for us in Mexico, we treat the water, but we use it in another ways that we are not using as a direct use. So 90% of our water is moving again to the system, but for the river, also Hardy River in the wetlands. So we need to think about how we can use the water and in agriculture, for example. And we have some areas that they use treated water from the Arenitas wetlands. And I think we started to do that a few years ago, but I think we need to move forward and also implement more of that technology. Also educated ourselves in the different technologies that we have. So we don't think about that desalination is bad for the environment. I think there is so much misinformation about it. And I think it's depending on how you proceed to the projects and how do you have the diagnosis of the system or we saw that in the coastal region of San Quintin that they use desalination for agricultural lands and they have a lot of profits about it and because they have a lot of programs with the aquifers. So we are not in that problem yet, but I think we need to start to make those projects more reliable and feasible for our understanding and putting together as a binational cooperation.
Very good. We do have several questions from the audience. One, and it's fine if this is beyond your your area of expertise, but it is an interesting question. What impact, if any, do you see the Colorado River negotiations will have on the USMCA negotiations as the US, Mexico, and Canada work to hopefully cement that, although that was not chosen to be extended by the US this year. So any thoughts? And it's okay if that's outside of your realm.
I mean, I'm a little concerned about us taking what is already a complicated negotiation that is about water and integrating it into a broader and more complex conversation that's about trade. It's going to be difficult enough to work through it has already been incredibly difficult to work through the interstate negotiations. Once we've found whatever is going to ultimately be the operating guidelines, implementing those operating guidelines just domestically inside of Arizona is going to be complicated. And then going to our neighbors in Mexico and saying, to what extent will you participate in shortage with us? That's a difficult conversation. Layering on top of it the complex negotiation on trade, I'm afraid will cloud an already complicated situation. I also worry a little bit about integrating too much the water debate into the trade debate, because we've seen instances in the past where treaty agreements about water deliveries, when they get integrated into trade agreements, people then perceive it as a property right. And then you'll sometimes get litigation over, well, Mexico has not delivered me the water they owe me, or the United States has not delivered me the water they owe me. And so they'll bring a lawsuit under provisions of international trade agreements. And then it ends up sort of stifling a lot of ways that we can be flexible in water, because we get trade agreements where we treat sort of national water deliveries as if they're domestic property rights.
Okay, you go ahead, Eliana, if you want to.
Well, just to say that that the historical data and the historical relationship between the US and Mexico show us that we have the institutional capacity also to have this cooperation to make results. And I think, and I'm hopeful that that we can separate the different topics that we have to share between Mexico and the US, and make the most of these situations that we share as a risk, as a problems, or as a issues, as opportunities to grow our collaboration, not to separate us and into another issues that make, like Rhett says, that jump into another issues that can be more complex. But I think that the histories show us that we can work together.
So I asked about ways to augment, but we have a question from the audience about what are the major ways that we can reduce the amount of water that's used, and in the context that water is so critical for everything, right? It's critical for agriculture, it's critical for new industry, it's critical for residents. But how can we best reduce water use, that side of the equation, ideally without impacting our growing economies?
Yeah, that's pretty difficult, because we saw also the history show us that we are going to have an impact, even if it's environmental, even if it's social or it's economic. So what I think that we must do is to get informed about the activities that we have in our local, regional, or nation area, that we can get involved as users. We are users in agriculture, we are users in cities, so we use water in our houses. So start in that. We diagnose your use of water, our clothes, how we eat, everything that we use water. Every amount of activity, even if it's a little activity or a little amount of water, it gets impact in another person. The water that I'm not using today, maybe I will use it in a few days. So that's another thing that we need to understand, that we are not reserve water. We are protecting water for have water to use tomorrow. So we are using the water. We are not storage the water to be there and not use it. So other users can be used that water. So my advice is to get involved in the activities that have a reduced water, environmental issues that also the environment can help us to storage water under the aquifers and also our rivers. Healthy rivers show us that can help us to reduce our impact in our water uses. So that's what I can say.
I completely agree. I mean, the place that the sector that uses the most water is agriculture. So that's also the place where we can get the most savings. But what people need to understand is farmers using less water is ultimately a price we're all going to pay, which is we're going to pay it in the grocery store. Ultimately, whether farmers are making more investments to be more efficient or whether they're growing less crops, either way, those costs are going to be borne by all of us. So what I would say is, first of all, how do we help farmers make transitions to either do we build in greater access to capital and credit for farmers to be more efficient, more laser leveling, more end drip irrigation, biosynthetic membrane irrigation? Like, how do we make sure farmers have access to the capital and credit they need to achieve efficiencies? The other thing is, if we're going to expect farmers to make transitions to more water efficient crops, we have to make sure the markets are there. Farmers are growing crops that there are markets for. So to ask a farmer who's growing alfalfa, why don't you shift to growing guayule, a drought resistant rubber plant? We need to attract rubber manufacturing to Arizona. Otherwise, farmers aren't going to have a market. And the other thing I want to tell people is, water conservation, sometimes we just stop with that conversation. We'll say, you should conserve water. But there's another question we should all be asking. Conserve it for what? Because if the answer is farmers are going to use less water so that we can have more data centers, that's not water conservation. We just picked winners and losers. Now, maybe we picked the right winners and losers, but we didn't save water. We just moved water from one sector to another. So when we talk about water conservation, we have to ask the next big question: conserve it for what? To do what? And that's the big conversation we need to have in Arizona, between the states, in the entire region between the United States and Mexico. Is there's enough water to do a lot of great things, but maybe not every good thing. So where do we want to put the water that we have? What's the future that we want?
Great answers. Thank you both. I can see we're about to get the hook. I have two questions I would love just really quick answers from each of you on. One is, Arizona and Mexico has a great long history of our shared challenges and coming up with shared solutions to them. So with all of us on the call that care about this, all the opportunities in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about all the elections going on, but you don't have to go there. But what can the people on this call, what's one thing they can do that will help to get us to solutions?
Thank you, Rhett. Well, as I said before, get involved and be informed about your local sources of water, because we all depend on Colorado River, but also we have our aquifers, Yuma Aquifer, also the Mexicali Valley Aquifer, the Imperial Valley Aquifer, which Imperial and Mexicali and Sonora is the same hydrological geological formation, but I think it's important to know where the water came from, also how we can get involved in the decision making and the policies that are being developed in the water in the water scheme, because there are very different ways to see water, even in our own perspective as academics or as industrials or as agricultural users. We have all very different perspectives, but we have a common issue, and we have to make an agreement how we can work together and to get involved in these conversations. Even starting with that, have the conversation is difficult, but I think it will be useful to know how it works and how we can get involved in the activities that have in our community.
So I would say at the household level, about 70% of your household water, it goes to outdoor water uses. And the indoor water use is going down a drain and it's getting recycled. So sometimes people think, oh, well, if I turn the faucet off while I'm brushing my teeth or if I take a shorter shower, but they're not paying attention to their leaking sprinkler system. The leaking sprinkler system is actually the place you need to be putting your money. That water going down the drain is getting recycled. So if you're thinking about what can I do at the household level, it's that. And what can you do at the policy level? I'd say it's an election year. Raise water up in your list of priorities. Make sure that the people who are running for elected office are people who are water literate people. And then I would also say let's try and keep partisan divisions out of the water debate. Let's treat any water win for Arizona, any water win for the region as a win for everyone. And we don't need to think about this, at least in partisan perspectives, as winners and losers. Water is political enough. There are enough divisions in water. We don't need to put on top of it a Republican-Democrat division or a U.S.-Mexico division. So the more united we stay, the less fractures we have between us, the more certainty and the more collaboration we get.
Awesome. Tara, if I could, one last thing, put you guys both on the spot with your crystal balls. There's a lot going on, some good, some bad. What do you foresee happening here in the sort of near to intermediate future?
My assumption is that the operating guidelines will come out shortly and that they will look something like the lower basin proposal, which will be a 20% cut to Arizona. That's a cut that we're pretty well prepared to absorb, but the internal conversation is going to be complicated about how we spread those cuts across Arizonans. I also don't know for sure if that cut is going to be enough. It's possible that if we have a bad winter, we're going to need additional cuts to respond to a particularly bad winter. Depending on what the operating guidelines are, there will at least be some people who will sue the federal government over the operating guidelines. The closer it looks to the lower basin proposal, the less likely states are to sue, but other users will sue. And will there be a lawsuit between the lower basin and the upper basin in the U.S. Supreme Court? Yes, I have a hard time seeing how that doesn't happen at this stage. And in terms of our future relationship with Mexico, I'll leave that to Eliana, but I do think our history has been one of really working collaboratively together and Mexico being an excellent partner and acknowledging sort of shortage sharing as a way that we can work together. So I'm optimistic about that part.
Well, I think that the plans should be or are going to be in a short time framework because we are going to have challenges, as Rhett says, that are more complicated in a few years. It's not like we have an agreement for a 10-year agreement, but I think we in the middle of that time or in the middle of the next minute between the US and Mexico, we need to have like every sort of 2-year planning to see to sit in and to see how it's changing in the watershed and also the cooperations between the states, the internal affairs that is going on, and to see how it is going to affect Mexico and the US. I think also, as Rhett said, I have fully faith that our history told us that we can share water without this non-agreement. We have very good agreements and flexible agreements. And also, I think that in the United States, the states are going to have more complex conversations that between the US and the Mexico governments in the federal way. But, well, we hope for the better in this situation.
Very good. Well, town hall is good at facilitating discussions, and discussions are what's going to make this succeed. So thank you both. You've brought a lot of wisdom. I wish the audience could be able to applaud you, because I'm sure they are, and appreciate your insights and your time. And I'll turn it over to Tara.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I think you know that this program and what you all presented in your wisdom is incredibly informative and insightful when we go over and no one drops off. So I can't thank all of our speakers enough, and Paul for hosting this really important webinar. And a reminder that the PowerPoints are already loaded to our website. I put a link in the chat, and that the video of this program will also be uploaded to our YouTube channel and our website. So if you want some folks to get in 1 hour an amazing overview of this complex situation, you can send them this link for this video. And also, a thanks to our International Relations Committee, and specifically Dr. Linda Elliott-Nelson, who continue to put on these programs that are all about how do we build and create and support that relationship, that very important relationship between Arizona and Mexico. Just this water topic shows us why that's so critical. There will probably be a few more programs. We have several in the works coming up, both online and in person, on this particular subject of Arizona, Mexico. So look for those. It just so happens that water is the official Arizona Town Hall topic for 2028. So that will be our topic throughout the year, including a background report. There will be lots of opportunity, not only to learn, but to have those creative, respectful, informed conversations that Paul alluded to, which are really the superpower of the Arizona Town Hall. So if you're not familiar with that aspect of our work, that is really what we're most known for, connecting people across political, geographical, demographic, other lines, so that we can work together to solve whatever the problem is. So thank you again to our speakers, to our panel, to all of you who showed up and asked great questions. And it sounds like our takeaway is go learn more and look at your dripper system in your yard. Pretty sure that's one of my problems, Rhett. So again, thank you so much to all of you, and look for that survey about the program so we can get informed from you on what else we can do to serve you as a nonprofit. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
all.
See ya.